using the size of muscles will influence the possible gains?
Yes, that's a good point, and probably something that we started to think about in study 2, where we compared between the different lift types, especially the lower body dominant movements, squat and deadlift, compared to the bench press, where we might think that movements involving larger muscle mass have more potential to improve strength at greater magnitude, but we didn't really think about that in study 1.
All right, Chris, welcome to Evidence Strong Show. It's my pleasure to have you. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me. So I'm Dr. Chris Latella. I'm the current course coordinator for the Master of Exercise Science Strength and Conditioning program here at Edith Cowan University in Perth, Australia. So as a brief bit of introduction into my line of research, my research actually spans across a couple of settings, so human performance and also human neurophysiology. And I have a particular interest in trying to understand fatigue and also strength adaptations with various forms of resistance training. So I've actually previously coached in powerlifting, and as I transitioned more into my academic role, I realized that there were many questions still to answer, especially about the sport of powerlifting, and also more broadly about strength changes across your lifespan. So a lot of our work in this space, and some of which I'm going to talk about today, has been a really strong collaborative effort with members of our research working group, known as the Strength Initiative, and also some of our industry partners. So what I actually am glad to see is that the collective body of research in powerlifting has continued to grow in recent years. And I think that some of the main principles and findings also hold relevance for other strength-focused sports, such as weightlifting and strongman, for example, and also help to advocate for strength training more widely in the community. So what I'm going to try and do today is actually present to you 3 studies and discuss the main points of each and give you a bit of an insight into the evolution of our research in this space, and in particular, our attempt to try and unpack some of the long-term changes in strength and performance in competitive powerlifters.
Awesome. Sounds exciting. I will just clarify that all 3 studies will be linked in the description below the video. So whoever needs to access the full paper, they will be able to.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. So the first study that I'm going to talk about today was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in 2020, titled Long-Term Strength Adaptations, a 15-year analysis of powerlifting athletes. And this paper was really the one that started off a series of questions that we were interested in exploring. So the aims of this first paper or study was to analyze the rate of muscular strength improvements in a cohort of competitive powerlifters. So specifically, we sought to investigate the rate of strength gain, and we used a couple of different metrics. One of these was strength gain per day, and that might sound a little bit of an odd metric, but I'll talk through it as we go along. And we also express this in terms of strength gain per year, because this is probably makes more practical sense to us as strength and conditioning coaches. So we did this in both male and female powerlifters over a data capture period, and I will stress that this is a retrospective sample of data that we were able to get our hands on, and this was over a 15-year period. So we kind of hypothesized that athletes with a lower starting or baseline strength would gain strength more quickly. If we think about our own resistance training in general, kind of resistance training literature, this kind of makes sense. When you start training, you gain strength pretty quickly, and then you kind of plateau the longer you're training for. So we also hypothesized that males would gain strength faster than females. So to go through a little bit about our methods and statistical approach, we used retrospective records. We actually collated data from 521 Powerlifting Australia sanctioned raw or classic competitions. Sometimes those terms have been used somewhat interchangeably. And this was between 2003 and 2018. We then screened these competition results for our inclusion criteria. So 3 lift competitions, making sure that people didn't bomb out of competition. So they posted a successful lift in each of the subdisciplines and so on and so forth. And this left us with a sample of just shy of 1,900 competitors. So about, around 626 females and around 1,271 males across junior, open and masters categories that were included in the analyses. So the performance data was the total score. So calculated as the sum of the highest successful weight lifted out of 3 attempts for each of the squat, bench press and deadlift during any given competition. Now, for the analysis for this first paper, we sought to initially determine the athlete's starting relative strength. So this was expressed for both males and females, regardless of their age. And we calculated this using the formula, the first total, so the first competition score that we could find for that athlete in the data capture period, divided by their competition body mass at the time. From there, we then stratified these competitors into starting strength quartiles. So just to clarify, quartile 1 here indicates competitors with a relative strength that was in the bottom 25% of the cohort at baseline, and conversely, quartile 4 indicated competitors with the highest relative strength at baseline, so the top 25%. Now, in addition to that, we also looked at the rate of strength gain per day, as I mentioned earlier. And again, sorry, to clarify, the formula for this was the maximum total, so the highest competition score posted for that athlete anywhere within that 15 years, minus their first recorded competition total. And then we divided this by the total number of days competing, or basically the time in between those two competitions. Now, for the statistical comparisons, we used one-way analysis of variances with two key post-hoc analyses when there were more than two groups compared. And we also performed some independent t-tests to compare between males and females. So now if we start to have a look at some of our results, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll kind of present the key findings here for each of these studies today and encourage you to go forth and read through the papers in a little bit more detail if you're interested. But not surprisingly, our starting and final strength did differ between the sexes. So males were generally stronger than females, okay? However, there was actually no difference observed between males and females for strength gain per day. And to us, that was actually really interesting. So to now put some kind of numerical values to this statement, we saw that females gained about 0.12 kilograms per day on their competition total, I should say. And for males, this was about 0.15 kilograms per day on the competition total. Now, if we look at this in terms of per year and extrapolate out that data, which I guess is a little bit easier for us to make sense of, we see that this is around 44 kilograms per year for females and 55 kilogram per year increase on the competition total for males. If we break this down even further into our strength quartiles, we see that the weakest males gained almost 77 kilograms on their total across a year, while the strongest males only gained around 37 kilograms per year on their total. What was also interesting here is that the distinction between quartiles, so quartile 1 being the weakest, quartile 4 being the strongest across males and females, but this distinction or this difference in the rate of strength gain between quartiles was not evident for females. So we only saw this occurring for males. Now, to me, any athlete or coach will be super excited if you're going to say that your athlete's going to add 40 kilograms to your competition total in a year. But I do think that there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind here. So one of these being that those athletes captured in this data set with less training experience likely had a larger potential to improve strength rapidly. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. We also know that in early comps in an athlete's career, often they tend to somewhat post conservative scores. They compete at local competitions, they try and build a total, they try and build some confidence. And so some of the progressions that we see, especially from these competitors over time, might be slightly inflated just due to some of those factors. Nonetheless, the strength of our analysis, we believe, is the large sample of included athletes that we were able to analyze. But I will just clarify and caution once again that these results that we've presented in the paper are group level changes. And so we can't expect the same responses to occur for every single athlete, especially our well-trained ones who have been competing for a long period of time, might already be competing at a national level or higher. Okay, so kind of just to recap study 1, basically based on this paper, we tried to recommend or at least suggest tentatively that coaches should consider trying to track the development, especially of powerlifting athletes over time, potentially using some sort of metric. Obviously, we put forward strength gain per day here, or perhaps strength gain per year is more feasible and practicable, and trying to use this as an evaluation tool and metric in this sport. So that's study 1. Okay, so now the next study that I'm going to talk about, study 2, we wanted to look a little bit more closely at the squat, bench press, and deadlift in a cohort of powerlifters over time and the changes in strength that may occur. So this paper was published in Medicine and Science in Sport and Exercise in 2022. And at the time, we were actually looking through the literature and we realized that there was a paucity of research regarding adaptations across each of the powerlifting movements. And hence, we were wondering how similar the rates of adaptations would be between these lifts. And again, other things such as whether the adaptations will be similar between males and females, especially considering things such as the generally greater upper body strength that males possess due to morphological and anatomical kind of differences there. As I said, that's a generalization, but that was our line of thinking at the time. So to clarify, we actually used and refined the same data set as study 1, and we wanted to analyze the magnitude of strength gain, so again, per day, and and per year. And I'll talk about some more intricate details in a second for the squat, bench press, and deadlift in both male and female powerlifting athletes. So based on the current literature at the time and our previous kind of analyses from study 1, we hypothesized that strength adaptations for each lift type would occur similarly across the cohort of powerlifting competitors and most likely between males and females. We did suspect, however, that athletes in the strongest strength quartile, so the top 25% in terms of strength, we expected these athletes to gain strength in each of the lifts at a slower rate. We also hypothesized that the rates of strength adaptation would be greater, as we kind of alluded to just before, in the lower body dominant lifts such as the squat and deadlift compared to the bench press, possibly because of the amount of muscle mass involved in those movements. So collectively, there were again just shy of 1,900 competitors that were able to include in this analysis. Okay, and we looked at the maximum and overall strength gain per day and also per year. Now, I'll just clarify what I mean by maximum and overall. So maximum is basically looking at comparing their first posted competition score to their highest posted competition score, irregardless of where that occurred across the kind of data analysis period. So that's their best competition performance that we could find. However, we also know, and as many of us coaches know, that strength over time can fluctuate across competitions for various reasons. It'd be nice if we could always go out and improve every time and post PBs. Doesn't always happen. And so sometimes athletes kind of finish off their career not at their peak. And we thought this was important because it might actually be more representative of the real world strength changes that occur over time. So that's why we looked at maximum and also overall strength, with overall strength basically taking their last recorded competition that we could find, even if it was not their best. So we used independent t-tests to compare outcomes between males and females. We also used head t-tests to compare maximum and overall strength with an athlete's baseline strength or their first recorded competition score. And again, we used one-way analysis of variances with two key post-hoc adjustments to compare strength changes between our strength quartiles. Now, there's quite a bit of data in this paper, but I'll just highlight that we also started to look at whether there was any sort of linear relationships that we could find for maximum and overall strength gain across males and females within our quartiles. So trying to see whether these adaptations that actually occur in a linear fashion over time, and that will lead into study 3 also. Nonetheless, I'll talk about the results first before we move on to that. So what did we see from study 2? Well, first of all, we saw that strength, whether we express this in absolute terms of weight lifted in terms of kilograms or normalize this to an athlete's body weight at the first competition, their maximum strength and their final or overall strength, again, was different between males and females. But what was really interesting to us was that the changes in strength over time did not significantly differ between males and females. And this was true for each of the lifts, so the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, okay? And this was true, again, whether we express this in terms of absolute strength changes over time or relative strength changes over time.
So are you saying that females and males gain strength very similarly?
Well, contrary to what perhaps we might typically think, at least in this paper, for the most part, there weren't any significant differences between males and females. For the most part, the adaptations are actually similar. The rate of adaptation is actually similar, which might actually be a little bit surprising to a lot of us, but at least that's what the data is suggesting at this point in time from this paper. And we look at maximum strength gain per year. We see for the squat, for example, for females, there's an improvement of somewhere around 20 kilograms per year, which also sounds like quite a lot. And for males, this was around 25 kilograms per year. So not a whole lot of difference there. If we look at the bench press, this was around 10 kilograms per year for females and 12.8 kilograms for males. And for the deadlift, this was around 18 and 21 kilograms respectively. But I do want to draw your attention also to the overall strength gain. So remember, we looked at maximum strength gain and secondly now overall strength gain, which might give us a more true real world representation of the fluctuations in strength that occur over time. And so the overall kind of net value that we might expect to see. So for the squat, if we look at it in terms of overall strength gain, we actually see that this comes down quite significantly. So for females, the improvement was around 4.5 kilograms per year and males 7.2 kilograms per year. For the bench press, it was around 6 kilos and 4.4 kilograms per year for females and males respectively. And for the deadlift, this was as low as 1.2 and 5.2 kilograms per year.
Yeah, this is pretty shocking because this is not something you would expect. So it's a very good finding.
Yeah, so just to kind of add a little bit more to study 2 before we move on, specifically between lift types, we saw that the change in absolute strength was actually, and this is for females, was actually greater for the squat and deadlift compared to the bench press, as we kind of originally hypothesized. Now, for males, the change in strength was also greater for the squat and deadlift compared to the bench press, and the deadlift was also significantly different in terms of the rate of adaptation to the bench press. So that kind of supports our original hypothesis about the lower body movements showing a greater magnitude of adaptation than the upper body. What we also saw that kind of confirmed what we started to explore in study 1 was that for males, I should say, the maximum strength gain per day did differ by starting strength quartile. This was especially true for the squat and deadlift. So to clarify a bit further, males in Q4, so our top 25% of males, displayed significantly less strength gain per day compared to those in Q1. And this was true for the squat and deadlift specifically. But for females, once again, which kind of reconfirms what we saw in study 1, strength gain per day did not significantly differ by quartile. And just as a final point, I mentioned earlier that we started to try and explore whether there were relationships between strength gain per day for the squat, bench press, and deadlift, whether there was any sort of linear relationship. However, this was really mixed and only displayed moderate linear relationships at best. So this gives us some further evidence that strength gains over time are not linear, and that kind of leads into study 3 also, which I'll talk about shortly. So as you can see, we started with one question, we found something, and then that opens up another whole series of questions.
Good.
Anyway, so just to conclude study 2, the kind of two main things that I want to point out from this study were that there were no real clear influences of sex on strength adaptations, so males and females, as the gains we saw were not clearly different between both males and females. There are possible differences regarding the magnitude of strength adaptations between lifts. So generally, we will likely see greater improvements in the squat and deadlift compared to the bench press. So for example, the maximum rates of adaptation were around 20 to 24 kilograms per year for the squat compared to the bench press. We remember back to table 1, which was only around 10.5 to 12.8 kilograms per year. And again, as I've said just before, males in the strongest quartile gained strength more slowly. The final study that I'm going to talk about, study 3, has just recently been published in Sports Medicine, titled Using Powerlifting Athletes to Determine Strength Adaptations Across Ages in Males and Females, a Longitudinal Growth Modeling Approach. So I'll talk you through this study, our rationale, and also what we found. So based on our prior studies, we were aware that the strength adaptations that we see over time, especially in powerlifters and likely true for other cohorts also, are not linear. Second to that, we were also kind of interested in strength changes over different stages of the lifespan. Now for us, this was really important from a powerlifting sport specific perspective, where athletes often have to compete in age and weight categories, but also to help inform population health more broadly.
Yes.
So specifically, we aim to identify differences in the rate and magnitude of strength adaptation based on age category and weight class for overall strength, so competition total, and also, again, more specifically, the squat, bench press, and deadlift respectively. So we hypothesized that older powerlifting athletes, so our masters category athletes, would display less strength adaptation over time compared to our younger counterparts. Conversely, based on our previous work in powerlifting athletes and cohorts, we also hypothesized that there will be no differences, again, that we'll be able to clearly see between males and females. Now, what we did for this study was that we actually used the Open Powerlifting database online, which is a great resource of competition records from many, many different powerlifting federations around the world. We limited our search and inclusion criteria to International Powerlifting Federation competitions only. The reason for this is that it's the largest kind of global sanctioned drug-tested federation, and from this, we only included raw competitions, so unequipped lifting, so raw or kind of classic competitions. And this actually resulted in a data set that included just over 46,000 observations over time and comprised of around 9,200 unique lifters that we could include in the analysis. And some of these were actually able to track for a period of almost 17 years, which was really fantastic from our perspective. Now, for the analysis, we considered both age and body weight as continuous variables for the purpose of statistical modelling. So we worked quite closely with some of our collaborators, in particular, Associate Professor James Still is quite well versed in statistical approaches and recommended we used some modelling, which was thought would be able to overcome some of the inherent limitations with more traditional statistics that we typically use in sports science. So that gets very detailed very quickly, and there is quite a bit of detail on the paper about it, but I'll will talk through the basics of it and what we tried to get out of that kind of analysis. So basically, we operationalized age category and body weight classes according to the specified IPF, International Powerlifting Federation categories, for the purpose of trying to visualize the models and the data that we would eventually be able to see. So we focused primarily actually on the qualitative description of the results based on visualizing the data and models. Now, all of these analyses were conducted in the program, and it was actually a mixed effects growth modeling approach that was adopted and performed for each of the performance outcome measures that we were interested in. So the squat, bench press, deadlift, and competition total. And we explored changes in each of these over time. So as I mentioned, this gets very detailed very quickly and quite complex and statistical language. But as I mentioned, if you are interested in this approach, then you can go through the paper and read some of the more intricate details, which I won't go through now.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so now when we start to look at the results of this statistical modeling, we actually saw that females appeared to have a steeper trajectory of strength gain compared to males when this was expressed as a percentage change compared to their baseline. Now, this is quite intriguing, and again, this is retrospective data, so we don't have extremely specific information about each competitor, but possibly, and again, this is a large generalization, as I know this is not always the case, this might be due to lower starting strength or perhaps training age of some of these females, and hence they can gain strength quite quickly. Now, again, that's an assumption and generalization, but it is something to think about. Furthermore, we also saw that with increased age, i.e. our masters category athletes, this was associated with strength changes, particularly for our masters female athletes that were still positive, but strength tended to decline for the eldest two masters male categories, so masters 3 and 4, which is 60 and 70 plus years of age. And I'll talk about the exact amounts of decline shortly. But I guess just some other summary level kind of findings was that younger athletes of both sexes, the strength improvements for these individuals were steeper than that for their older counterparts. And some other factors such as, in addition, athletes with increased body weight at baseline were the strongest in terms of absolute strength. Heavier athletes generally move more weight as a very general rule.
Yep.
And athletes with lesser body weight at baseline actually showed the greater rates of strength gain. Now, further to all of that, what we also found was quite interesting and probably not surprising, but good to at least provide some evidence for it, was that the greatest gains in strength were noted in the earliest phases of participation. So, for example, in the first year of competing, we can expect to see that athletes will improve their strength by about 7.5 to 12.5% overall. Now, after 10 years, this only improves by around 20% above baseline. So we see the majority of these gains occurring in the first year. There are some, I'll clarify, there is some other research in more of a general population that shows that strength gains within the first year or two can actually exceed 30 or 40%, I believe it is. And so we might be thinking, well, in powerlifters, why is it only 7.5? 12.5%. And I think we need to remember that we are actually capturing the data at their first competition. So it's likely that these individuals have been training for some time before they actually start competing. So we are missing that really probably early phase of training where we get all those kind of newbie gains, if we want to talk about it that way. Nonetheless, this does give us a strong indication that these adaptations are not linear, which we started to see in study 2. So of particular interest to us was the fact that females, as I started to mention before, continued to improve their strength despite advancing age. So for example, our Masters 3 and 4 category females, so 60 and 70 plus years of age, still were able to improve strength somewhere between 2.5 to 5% over the data analysis period. For males, as I mentioned before, some strength declines were noted with advanced age, however. So our Masters 3 and 4 category males we saw a reduction of around 5% over the data capture period. So remember, this is over many, many years. And if we kind of work that out, it's only about 0.35% reduction in strength per year. We were quite excited about this, although we will probably expect that to some degree, because this is a large attenuation of the expected declines in strength that we might see in the general population, where it's very well known that people, especially 60 plus, can easily lose 1 to 2% of their strength per year and can compound very quickly. And we know that very quickly this can also start to affect things such as physical function, health, and even increase mortality risk, for example. So overall, this paper has kind of helped us to provide some insight into human strength adaptations and some biological and morphological factors at a very rudimentary level, such as age, sex, and body weight. So overall, study 3 has helped us to provide some insight into human strength adaptations and several biological and morphological factors at a very rudimentary level, so things such as age, gender, and body weight that may impact it. Now, although the findings are most applicable to the sport of powerlifting, we do contend that these findings also help to provide some population-level support for the role of consistent and continued strength training to improve strength across the lifespan, or at least to mitigate the age-related declines that are known to occur with advanced age. And so we kind of hope that this information also encourages participation in powerlifting or other strength sports such as weightlifting, strongman, or whatever people think is most appropriate for them, and hopefully also helps to inform public health messaging as well. So I guess now if we try and think about the cohesiveness of these 3 studies and what is this information telling us, or what does it add to the literature, I think there's a few things we can draw on. I think first of all, the findings of these studies can be used individually or even collectively to help track and benchmark powerlifting athletes and also add to the general evidence base in the sport of powerlifting and continue to grow that area of research. I think what we see overall is that there may be some differences in the rates of adaptations based on various factors such as starting strength level, which is especially true for males, not so apparent for females, potentially some differences between genders, but that, again, for the most part, that wasn't really clear or significant, and also the type of lift, remembering that our lower body lifts likely have more potential to improve strength at a greater rate compared to our upper body lifts. Now, again, this also depends on how we present and interpret our data. We also saw that strength adaptations over time are not linear, but regardless of all these things, I think it does support the benefits of strength training across the lifespan, as I said, which I think is an important general take-home message. And so we do suggest that powerlifting is a viable option for people of any age to participate in. We know that it is growing at the grassroots level, it's accessible, is accompanied by a low injury risk, and one of the benefits also is that people can train in their own time. So our next steps as a research group are to continue to look more closely at athlete and competition factors that might impact performance over time, and that might need to be done with some prospective studies where we can go and collect some actual data on athletes or through interviews or other means. We're also interested in exploring similar types of questions in parapowerlifting. So some of my colleagues actually from the Strength Initiative Research Group currently leading some work in this space, and so if you do stay tuned, there should be some more work hopefully coming out over the next year or 2.
That sounds amazing. We'll be definitely waiting. And if you can put us in touch with the outcome delivery person, that would be amazing.
Definitely, no problems at all.
Okay, I have 2 short questions I always ask at the end. The first one is your favorite color.
Yep, so I'm pretty plain and simple. So my favorite color would probably be dark blue.
All right, dark blue it is. And where people can find you when they want to contact you or start a conversation, where should they go?
Yep, so my details are on the Edith Cowan University website. You can email me directly. So my email is c.latella@ecu.edu.au. I guess I can also be found on LinkedIn and Twitter, or X as it's now called, I believe. My Twitter handle is clatella1, and I would be more than happy to answer any further questions or also chat about potential future collaborations and ideas.
Awesome. Sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for today, and see you again, I hope.
No worries. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you.